first remote conferencing public meeting of the Climate Change Committee. Before we get started, I will introduce everybody and explain how the meeting is going to work. I'm hoping that all the participants are now familiar with the mechanics of these meetings, and I've asked everyone to keep themselves muted when they're not speaking. If people want to ask a question or make a comment, I ask you to raise your little blue hand within the Zoom meeting, and I will then invite you to speak. For members of the public looking in, you're not going to be able to see the little blue hands, but they will be, because they're not visible in the live web stream. You'll have to take it from me that they're being lifted and put down. I'll take people in the order in which I see them raise their hands. If everyone, or if anyone has a supplementary point they want to bring in relating to the item that's being discussed, can you raise your physical hand? And then we'll be able to bring you in if there's a point you want to make, if it's an appropriate time to do so. Can I remind everyone that these meetings are being broadcast live? So, and they're being recorded and posted onto YouTube for the rest of time. So please bear that in mind, and please also keep yourself in shot all the time if you can. Thank you. You will see, so you can see the committee members who are on your screen now, if you're watching from the public. There are other people involved. We've had apologies from Councillor Tony Fisher, and Councillor Stephen Fenton is substituting for Councillor Fisher. Also, I will be welcoming further down the road a new councillor who will be joining us in our deliberations, Councillor Martin Rowley. I'm delighted that he's joining us. He won't be a voting member, but he is representing the Conservatives, and that's a great thing, because from the word go, this committee has said we would like all the parties to be involved in working together to deliver a zero carbon future. And I'm sure we'd all welcome the independents if they would like to join us as well at future meetings. What else have I got to say here? Oh yes, we're going to be joined by a number of officers, and I will be introducing them as we go through the meeting. We have with us for this meeting Janie Berry, who's the Director of Governance, and we will be hearing from Sean Gibbons, who's the Head of Carbon Reduction. We also have technical officers in the background, so you know. So if there are kind of weird random voices occasionally, if there's a technical problem, that's who it is. And they'll be helping to make sure everything runs smoothly, which I hope it will. In a break with tradition, I will say that I'm not going to advise you, as I would usually do, on the locations of the toilets in the emergency exits. If you don't know where those are in your own house by now, that's not really something I can help with. So that's, I think, all the housekeeping out of the way. And we can now move on. We've got to, first of all, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest that people would like to raise? I'm not seeing any hands. Next, we move on to the minutes of the meeting. I'm aware that this is a very long time ago. The last meeting we held was back in March. So I hope you've had a chance to go through the minutes and to note if there was anything that you felt needed correcting or that I hadn't said or wasn't in the minutes. Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Sorry, I'll raise the blue hand as well. Right, cool. So there is something that needs correcting on page 3 of the printed minutes. In the items that we resolved to recommend in regards to supporting One Planet York, the first one says the committee recommends to the executive that it explores One Planet York's involvement in any climate change committee that could be set up. That should read in any climate change commission that should be set up.
Yeah, good point. Yes,
because it's quite there is a significant difference, obviously, so I'm not going to explain it all now, but it does need changing.
Yeah. Okay, is that what everyone else remembers as well? Any thoughts? No. Okay, but I think you're correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Are there any other thoughts on the minutes? No, in which case, can I sign them at an appropriate moment? I'm not seeing any dissent, so I will move forward on that basis. So, okay, so the minutes are approved and we'll sign them later. So now we've got no public participation today. You will note, members will note that we've always had a huge number of people participating and it's been great. But we've got a lot to get through today, and it's our first public meeting since being unable to operate for a few months. So in a sense, we can get on and hope that our next meeting gets loads of public participation.
Chair, just before we continue, could I just confirm that Councillor Johns is actually present in the meeting? He's just having IT difficulties, so he won't be on the camera. So he's on the telephone, but he is present for this meeting.
Thank you for putting that in. And I'm not sure if it's appearing on the screen, so you're right. I'm not sure that the public will be able to see that. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you. I've taken myself off mute just to confirm I am here, and yeah,
great.
Thanks for flagging it.
Thank you, Stuart. So we're about to launch into the next item on the agenda. I'd just like to give a very brief minute of explaining the content of where we are and putting it into context for the public, really, since it's been a long time. Oh, and I can see that we're welcoming now Terry Smithson, who is a co-opted member of this committee. We're always very glad to see him. He's one of the directors of the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and brings a whole load of expertise to our deliberations.
Apologies for the late arrival, Chair. I had a board meeting with my job, so I had to do that first. Thanks.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So yes, just the very briefest overview, because we've got a number of key papers here that we're looking at. In March 2019, for people who are not aware of it, full council declared a climate emergency and committed to delivering a zero carbon York. This committee was formed in the summer of last year, and from the start applauded the courage of all the councillors who made that declaration, and recognised that the target date of 2030 was a very, very demanding one. The papers you're seeing here today are looking at all of that through the eyes of our new head of carbon reduction. And you will see through the course of these papers that the deadlines are not 2030 now for the whole city. But I would say that this is not something to be ashamed of for any of us or to look sadly at. What this actually marks is a fantastic transformation, in my view, that we started off with an ambition from our heart. And now, thanks to the fact that we've now got a carbon reduction, a team we're assembling, we can now approach this from the head. We can start engaging with this seriously. And so I'm happy about all of that. I'm happy that we can deliver a zero carbon future. I think we're much closer now than we were a year ago. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sean Gibbons, our new head of carbon reduction, to set out his presentation on how he thinks we are actually going to deliver the substantive change we all want to see. Sean, welcome, and please give us your presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Vassie. Just while you all load up your versions of the presentation titled The Climate Change Committee December 2020, and whilst we're all on the holding screen, I just want to make a point that we will get quite deep into some topics here, and there's an assumed knowledge within the virtual room around the science behind climate change. But if you want to discuss anything, go into more depth around the science of climate change, then I'm very happy to do that outside of this meeting as well. The first slide is a bit of a reflection on what you've just said, Councillor Vassie, around the establishment of the climate emergency within York in March 2019. and subsequent ambition of City of York Council for York to be a carbon neutral city by 2030. The Climate Change Policy and Scrutiny Committee was then established in summer, or perhaps in September 2019, as is provided in this presentation, with the aim of developing a 10-year plan that will show current baseline for carbon emissions for York and a route map of how we'll achieve our carbon neutral ambition. Pending executive decision paper later this month, December 2020, could see the establishment of the York Climate Commission. And this will be a place-based network for climate action within the city. And then as early as spring next year, we'll be looking to bring forward our updated version of York's climate change strategy, which will set the strategic direction for decarbonising York. The next slide is a brief summary of what a climate commission will do for York and what a place-based network for climate action is. Local climate commissions are starting up all across the country, and they're being modelled on the UK government's Climate Change Committee. They're designed to bring together local stakeholders to drive the transformative change that we need to see in our cities. Membership of climate commissions reflects the shared ownership of the decarbonisation agenda across the city, and it can call upon technical expertise to provide information and advice to the council and operate beyond the boundaries of our delivery. It's important that the commission represents key sectors in the city and that members are able to support material change, but it will not be setting policy or making decisions on the council's behalf. It's important that the council retains the role of principal placemaker for York and will ultimately set the strategic vision for the city. Thinking of that, the next slide introduces what York climate change strategy could consist of and what we think it should consist of. And there's three important aspects to a climate change strategy. The first is baseline reporting. It's really important that we understand where we are now, where we've been, and where we need to get to. The second element of a good climate change strategy is the decarbonisation roadmap, and that will set out what needs to happen by when. The third part of the strategy will be the action plan, and if the roadmap is what needs to happen, the action plan is how it's going to happen, setting out how we plan to deliver a carbon neutral York. So the next slide, thinking about baselining. When we consider a climate change strategy and our carbon reduction ambition, we need to make a distinction between emissions that are within our influence as a city, and that's scope 1 and scope 2 emissions in this diagram within our city boundary, and those that we don't have influence over, or scope 3, those emissions that are outside of our boundary. And scope 3 emissions include things like products that are manufactured outside of York, raw materials that are extracted outside of York and then brought into the city boundary. A carbon neutral York, in my view, should be based upon scope 1 and 2 emissions, but with a commitment that we'll also look to minimise our scope 3 emissions and that we'll constantly reevaluate this approach. The next slide on baseline and reporting looks at progress for the city so far against a 2000 baseline. As you'll see on the left, the squares there, emissions have reduced by close to a half, 44% in the 20 years since the year 2000. This is significant progress, but over the next 10 years, we'd need to reduce our emissions by 3/4 to get to our lowest estimated annual emissions level. Essentially, that's twice as far in half of the time. By sector, on the right-hand side, we can see that domestic energy consumption and the transport sector are the two most significant contributors. And the challenges associated with decarbonising these two sectors in particular are well documented around individual choices. The next slide considers putting together a carbon neutral roadmap right now. And if we were to do that, we'd be well-minded to consider this roadmap in the context of other local and national roadmaps and policies. Of course, York doesn't exist in a vacuum, and there are decisions that are being made right now around big subjects like carbon capture and storage, electric vehicles, hydrogen power, that will have a significant impact on the technical feasibility and cost implication for decarbonising York. The next slide with the graph showing a zero carbon pathway for York shows what a net zero roadmap, net zero pathway might look like for our city. The dotted line at the top there, which is business as usual, shows how emissions would level off under current levels of activity. And that includes projected population increases and economic growth. So despite a huge amount of activity to reduce our emissions, it would level off over the next 20 to 30 years. The thickest black line is a science-based approach to carbon budgeting, and this would keep York within a compatible trajectory for limiting global temperature increases within 1.5 degrees C, as recommended in the IPCC's special report. So essentially anything below that line would be compatible with that trajectory. Then there are several pathways that have resulted from research at both the local and regional level. But if you look closely, you'll see that none of these pathways indicate a technically feasible date of 2030 for zero emissions for York. The Tyndall Institute produced the most ambitious reduction trajectory, but it's also the oldest report relying on early government retrofit projections that have been shown to be hugely overambitious. York and North Yorkshire LEP suggests a 2030-40 date is possible under max ambition scenario, but again, this is dependent on breakthroughs in fields of hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. West Yorkshire Combined Authority's roadmap to decarbonise is by 2038. You could say that geography shares a similar urban landscape to York. The next slide, a net zero date for York with the table below that, shows some potential cost implications of those different trajectories which we've just spoken about. These cost implications are only illustrative, and for comparative purposes, it's worth noting that there is uncertainty attached to the assumptions, and these costs could range quite widely. But the fundamental message here is that the financial implication of decarbonising quicker is more significant. These costs are associated with offsetting residual emissions that would remain despite the most technically ambitious decarbonisation roadmap. It's also worth noting that these are not costs that are currently budgeted for the council. These would be costs that would be borne by the whole city of York. The next slide then goes on to expand the roadmap slightly, considering some of the details that we've just spoken about around emissions reduction targets, and also some local, regional and national policy ambitions as well. Significant policy, which has just recently been announced, includes the banning of all internal combustion engine vehicles, new internal combustion engine vehicles in 2030, housing retrofit strategy, and private rented sector minimum energy efficiency standards for buildings of EPC level C in 2028. And also it demonstrates some of the scale of the challenge for York, with numbers like replacing 1,500 electric internal combustion engine vehicles with EVs on our roads, and also retrofitting around 50,000 of our homes by 2032. Going on to slide 11. This is a quick summary of some of the current or planned carbon reduction activity that's being delivered by the council at the moment. I even have to acknowledge this isn't a complete picture. We're missing a couple of initiatives around waste collection, recycling and energy recovery in there. But I think it gives an idea of the breadth of work that we're currently involved in, and also the cross-departmental scope of carbon reduction activity in the council as well. Setting it out in this fashion, I think, also helps to start categorising our activity around some key themes, and that's what the colour coordination is trying to show. So the red activity in the top left relates to transport initiatives. The green in the bottom left relates to place-based activity. The yellow in the top right is more people-based initiatives. The blue on the bottom right is delivery around buildings, and the grey in the centre is around energy generation, transmission and distribution. So if we move on to the next slide, this then starts to show these key themes and how and CYC's role in delivering across these key themes. So the council can act as a leader first and foremost, both decarbonising our own activity from our own fleet to our corporate buildings, to our council houses, and to training our own staff as well, so we make better decisions. The council can also be an influencer for carbon reduction through our procurement processes, the contracts that we offer, including the franchised public transport contract. We can influence other public services, other public buildings, other public institutions like schools, hospitals and leisure centres. On the outside of this diagram, the council can also act as an enabler, supporting our residents and private businesses to make the decisions necessary to realise our ambition, whether that relates to personal travel choices, by making sure that the charging infrastructure gives people confidence if they want to choose an electric vehicle, to providing information on low carbon food choices, so people are best want to make those decisions themselves. The next slide's illustrative. It kind of demonstrates what topic areas we need to consider when developing our climate change strategy for York, and just how broad it will need to be, but also that all of these areas need to be underpinned by a digital strategy that can provide an information feedback loop for continuous improvement, so we're always evaluating our performance and making better policy decisions and delivering better projects. The final slide sets out some key next steps in development of our climate change strategy, but also in supporting the broader decarbonisation work. So we're starting now to understand the current baseline for carbon emissions within York, both as a city and for us as a council. The next thing to do is to agree a zero carbon pathway, and Councillor Vassey, you hinted that whilst 2030 set out the ambition and showed leadership for the council, as more information is becoming available, 2030 might not only be unfeasible from a technical perspective, but it might not be the most cost-effective way to decarbonise, still within our 1.5 degree carbon budget. We can then start to develop a roadmap for York and set out what needs to happen by when, and produce the action plan of how we're going to do it. All of this underpinned by a data-led approach. And of course, we need to include all the key stakeholders across the city and citizen engagement as part of that process as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Sean. Rather than having questions on that, my thought is, and I'm happy to have thoughts of other people on the committee, the following agenda item basically speaks to what we've just seen. So if Sean, you can introduce that agenda item, we can bring in Martin Rowley to be on screen with us, and we can start the business of, good to see you now with us, Martin, and maybe have our debate around that and use your presentation to inform what we're talking about. Rather than having the same discussion twice. If that's okay with everyone, I'm not seeing any wild dissent. So if we can then move on then to agenda item 5, Sean, and ask you to present that. In a sense, you'll have presented bits of it already, but if you could introduce that and then we can debate.
Yeah, sure. So this agenda item is around York emissions reporting and our carbon neutral ambition. And it's important to state that by setting out our by responding to the climate emergency and setting out 2030 as an ambition for carbon neutrality for York, it set a clear message of the council's intent to respond to that climate emergency and remain within the carbon budget that would limit global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees C as recommended by the IPCC's special report. We're not trying to diminish the climate emergency in any way in this report. We're just simply reflecting on more information that's now become available to us. The last time that we produced a greenhouse gas inventory for the council's own emissions was in 2011, 2012. In that year, our scope 1 and scope 2 CO2 equivalent emissions were 25,000 tonnes. In the same year, for the City of York, CO2 emissions were 1.116 million tonnes. It's proposed that we report emissions for CYC on the national emissions data for York on an annual basis. For York, the recommendation is that we use the national data sets for the city. This would reduce the amount of additional officer time compiling these data sets. It's openly available to us, and an enormous amount of work goes into compiling that data set anyway. Work has begun to calculate the CO2 emissions for the council's own operations in 2019-2020, and early indications are that there's been a 26% reduction from 2011-2012 data. For many reasons, it's now worth reconsidering our net zero carbon ambition, not least from the perspective of technical potential. As we've said, there are significant policy decisions that will impact our ability to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. These include hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. Without significant change in government policy around these technologies, it's very difficult to see how 2030 is a realistic carbon neutral date for York. There's also the topic of regional alignment. York and North Yorkshire LEP have set a target date for 2034, and there'll be policy decisions made at a regional level to support this. Similarly, West Yorkshire Combined Authority have set a target date of 2038, and policy in that region will also look to reflect this. The other thing that's become clear is the financial cost of decarbonisation. It's been estimated that an investment of between 1.1 billion and 2.3 billion will be required for York to become carbon neutral. There's also the consideration of potential carbon offsetting if we don't achieve absolute zero emissions by our target date as well, and that also needs to be considered.
Right, thank you for that. And as I said at the start, I think what impresses me is that we're now moving to realism and to creating plans that can actually deliver what we all want to see. I'd love to hear what other people have got to say on it. I think that the first thing I would pick up from your presentation, and that I think members of the public and councillors and everything else will wish to move on, is in your presentation, you did show that one of the steps was achieving a zero carbon council by 2030. And I imagine, and I'm keen to hear what everyone else around the virtual table thinks, but I imagine that that is of vital importance to all of us, because I think we all recognise the key leadership role we have as a council to demonstrate that we are putting our house in order and to lift other people up to believe that we can achieve and to drive through that process of change. Are you content, Sean, that we can deliver that?
Yeah, that's right, Councillor. I think it's really important that we aim to be as ambitious as we possibly can as a council for decarbonising our own operations. And from speaking across the different teams on our own strategies for decarbonising our own activity, I think that 2030 is a technical possibility for decarbonising our own operations.
Good, that's good to hear. I can talk for hours, but I'm keen to get the thoughts of other people here to the presentation and to the report that we've got in front of us. So what will others? I've got two hands up now, so I've got Councillor Baker and then Councillor Barnes. So Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks so much, Sean. I really appreciate listening to your presentation. I had some questions, technical questions, like you said, and that you can assume that we all know a fair bit by now, but you've actually really clarified a few things for me as well, just in that presentation now. So I'm sure you have done for members of the public watching as well. So thank you. And I'm really buoyed on by the fact that you've said that technically we could, as a council, be carbon neutral by 2030. I think that's a wonderful ambition that we should stick to. So yeah, let's be the game changers and lead on that. I would support that suggestion. If I'm allowed a question, let's have a look. No, I'll just show support for that for now, and then I'll come back with a question in a bit as we move on.
Okay, thank you. We can come back to you. So let's move on then to Councillor Barnes.
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Just testing the mute function was working. Sean, thanks very much for your report and your presentation. It's been really good to see, and nice to see all the sort of essential kind of building blocks there for a strategy. A couple of questions, if I may. One is just seeking clarification around, you cited historic carbon reduction figures relative to, I think, a 2000 baseline. I think you said 26%. I'm just trying to understand. I know that very often when we talk about reduction against baselines, certainly against 1990, by far the greatest chunk of that reduction is always attributed to decarbonisation of power, which obviously is, national result of national policy. Is that the same here in terms of that 26% reduction that you referenced?
Yeah, for the city since 2000, it's a 44% reduction, Councillor Barnes. But again, you are right that at a national scale, a large proportion of the decarbonisation of the UK has come from the heavy lifting of decarbonising of the power grid. But there are also contributions that we've made locally to decarbonising that power grid through installing solar panels and renewable generation locally as well. So I think we can still take some credit for that.
Yeah, okay. No, that's great, thank you. And then the other question I had, it's good to see these kind of scopes 1, 2, 3, and I guess what we've got here is some kind of generic guidance, a generic sort of guidance model, if you like, in terms of what elements we put into each scope. At some point, I guess it would be your plan to begin to put some specifics to that in terms of, what we see as being in our more specific York-focused Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3.
And the standardised methodology for calculating your Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions that can be applied to York, and we will follow that methodology to make sure we're accounting for all of the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions in the city. Yeah.
Okay, and I guess a question then again relating to that, and also relating to the point you made that a net zero council is achievable by 2030. Like Councillor Barker, obviously I welcome that, and the key point I suppose you made there is that it's technically possible. Clearly there will be market and sort of regulatory or policy decisions and challenges that ultimately determine whether we'll arrive at that or not. Could I just ask, when you say a net zero council, I have a vision in my head in terms of what I think that might involve, and I would like it to involve some of the services which we don't perhaps directly deliver, but we're part of either North Yorkshire kind of consortia delivery models, or some of the stuff that we outsource. So I'm thinking waste services, for example, some of the social housing as well. Could you just give us an indication of what you have in mind when you say a net zero council?
Yeah, sure. Our own fleet, our own corporate buildings and staff operations, and our own council housing stock as well, which will be a challenge to decarbonise. We have 7,500 of our own council housing assets. That will be tough, but we're developing a retrofit strategy that can achieve that.
Yeah, okay. So housing association, you wouldn't include within that?
I'll take a look, but I wouldn't think so first thought.
Okay. All right, and things like the Your Waste, any fleet vehicles there? Would we be including all refuse?
The HGV vehicles will be extremely difficult to net zero. I think we're in the process of purchasing 2 electric waste refuse vehicles at the moment. They're extremely expensive though. Net zero carbon by 2030 doesn't mean the elimination of all of our emissions, and we are doing work that can offset some residual emissions as well, like the planting of York Community Woodland with 50,000 trees, and that can be used to offset some of our residual emissions as well. Yeah.
All right, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Next on my list is Councillor Melly, and then Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering if we could talk a bit more about energy production, because I think in your report you said that was one of the largest contributors to carbon emissions in the city. Do you know if the City Council is developing a local area energy plan? I know that some local authorities do. Is that something that we'll be working on as a council? And does network planning and that sort of thing form part of the local plan, so that city development and energy development can go hand in hand?
Yeah, I think a local area energy plan for York would be a sensible approach for identifying carbon reduction opportunities in terms of energy across the city. And it's also a great way of making sure that we're integrating across the 3 energy vectors of heat, power and transport to create efficiencies across those different service areas as well. We're working with stakeholders in that area, including Northern Power Grid and Northern Gas Network, to make sure that we're part of the decarbonisation plans, and that their decarbonisation plans reflect the ambitions for York as well.
I think it is easier for sorry, I've made notes. I had a conversation with Northern Power Grid about them investing and that sort of thing, and they said it's easier for them to invest in infrastructure, energy infrastructure, if the local authority does have a local area energy plan and that sort of thing. So I think there's a few areas where, yes, when it comes to carbon emission reduction and energy, we do rely a lot on national schemes, but I think there's other local partners we can work with as well in the region, not quite as local as York, but more widely as well.
Yeah, you're right. And actually, one of the slides within the presentation, which showed the summary of the current delivery activity for the council, or planned delivery activity, will show it might not be called local area energy planning there. It might be abbreviated to LAEP, but that reflects my ambition of creating a local area energy plan for York. Yes.
That's great. And if I can just interject before bringing in Councillor Fenton, it is, as Councillor Melly says there, it is seen in so many of the leading local authorities, this ability to look at the whole territory, map out geothermal energy, energy from aquifers, energy from water, energy from solar, and all of that stuff, to properly understand the total potential, which is, I think, what Councillor Melly's raising there. And understanding that to then make that available to others, because part of the challenge is that if you're going to create all of that information, it should be available, surely, Sean, on a database as part of GIS stuff that can supply planning and developers, in order to ensure that everything that comes to planning factors in that local energy map.
Yeah, very true. The local area energy plan will take a holistic approach to energy to identify opportunity areas and potential projects. Not all of those potential projects will be investable by the council, so you're absolutely right that we're encouraging third-party organisations to make the most of the energy opportunities available across the city as well.
Thank you. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. We're going to ask a question about the carbon reduction activity honeycomb or blockbuster diagram. And I note it does refer to local area energy planning, which is welcome. It also refers to something called gamification, which Google tells me is the application of game design principles and concepts in a non-game context, which sounds fascinating, but I've no idea what it is. So the first question is it'd be really interesting to understand how that will be part of our activity. The second question, you mentioned the overall, or the likely cost of of York becoming net zero, and you mentioned 1.1 to 2.3 billion. And you talked about the City of York Council, it being technically possible to achieve carbon zero by 2030. Have you done any costings around that? I'm just thinking in terms of, while something may be technically possible, I think we also need to understand the potential cost and what impact that might have in terms of deliverability. So it'd be useful to get your thoughts on that, on those two things. Thank you.
Yeah, good questions, Councillor Fenton. Thank you. Yeah, gamification is an increasingly popular area of study around nudge behaviour and how we influence positive actions within the population that we will require. Achieving carbon neutrality for the city was an enormous task, and we will need everyone to support us on this journey. So how do we incentivise our citizens to take those first steps towards supporting our city's ambition, providing rewards to incentivise those types of behaviours, and gamification and different models of that type are one area that we need to look at to positively reinforce good behaviours and create a virtuous cycle so that those positive behaviours are continuously reinforced. On costing of decarbonisation for the council, again, a great question. It's something that we will need to look into more. I've started conversations across the different departments about what their internal strategies are around general replacement and upgrade of our fleet and of our housing stock. More work needs to be done on that until we have a clearer picture of how much it will cost. But a lot of the improvements that need to be made to support decarbonisation can be made through operating budget and planned maintenance budget, so that will go some way towards it, but there could potentially be some additional cost achieving net zero.
Supplementary, if you want, Councillor Fenton, and then
yeah.
Go to Councillor Baker.
Thank you. No, that's
and I have seen you, Councillor Melly.
Thank you. That's helpful. I suppose as you're having those conversations, it would be helpful to sort of maybe, I'm sure you will have done. We'll want to do this anyway. Identify the sort of the quick wins potentially, where there's the timing aligns in terms of, we're just about to make an investment. Well, you can help that investment be made in the right direction, and maybe also identifying the kind of harder to do things. It'd be really useful for this committee to have oversight of where those, the really the tough areas might be that might, whilst it may be technically possible, there may be other hurdles that we'll need to think about how we might overcome them. But thanks for that.
Yeah, sure.
Is yours related, Councillor Melly, to this?
I have a supplementary question. My blue hand was up because I had a complete different question, but I also have a supplementary question to this.
Okay, I'll let you ask your supplementary question and then come back to you for the rest.
Sure, thanks. It was about gamification, which actually it wasn't a term I'd come across before, but when I was reading your report, you've recommended annual reporting of the council on carbon emissions, and I did at that point think that actually that sort of reporting is great for accountability, but it works best if other organisations, other councils, other large organisations in the city are also reporting, and you can have that kind of competition and shared accountability. So I will be working with other such organisations to try and see if maybe we can lead the way and be one of the first to have annual reporting, but encourage others to do it as well, to increase that accountability and spur each other on.
Yes, there will be some other organisations already reporting, and more will start to report. I think there's a risk that if we start comparing council operations with private sector or different public sectors, we're at risk of comparing apples and pears. But there are organisations like the Local Government Association that provides handy tool for comparison on carbon emissions across all local authorities in the country. And you're right that leaderboards like those can support the kind of behaviour change aspect as well.
Great. I'll move on and come back to you later, Councillor Melly, for the other points. Councillor Baker and then Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair. So it's another question about one of the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hexagons in the honeycomb. So circular economy, like I was at a University of York conference on that the students had done a lot of work on about a new strategy for the 3 R's, reducing, reusing and recycling. And one of their recommendations was education about circular economy. So I just wonder if you can just say a little bit now in plain terms as to what that is and how it fits into the which departments across City of York Council, or which areas specifically, if not all, will be tied into a circular economy?
Yeah, a great question. I don't have many details on which departments of the council will be tied to circular economy, but generally speaking, circular economy is about minimising raw materials that are used in your economy and minimising the waste that's subsequently produced, so that waste can become raw materials, and there's subsequent carbon emission saving associated with that, because you're not using the same energy to input to create new materials.
Thank you. Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sean, for your report. It's really welcome, and I'm really pleased to see you in this post at the council, and this work that you've done. Again, I appreciate it. I just wanted to ask you about offsetting. In order to become carbon neutral, we're going to have to offset. So really, I'd just be after your views on good offsetting. What are those examples, and what scale of offsetting? Because you know, I'd assume in my question to you that planting trees within the City of York local authority area is not going to be enough in terms of offsetting. So what else, and how big is the scale of offsetting that's required?
I think it's worth acknowledging that offsetting will have to be part of the solution for becoming a carbon neutral city for York. We will not achieve zero emissions by 2030, 2034 or 2038. So we will need to consider offsetting. I haven't yet considered what that offsetting strategy might look like, but it will be worth setting one up to make sure that we have a hierarchy for when we're considering our offsetting, so that first and foremost, carbon offsetting happens at a local level, and then we're also making sure that any offsetting that can't be made locally is best value and projects that are worth investing in as well.
Is that okay, Councillor Myers?
Yeah, it is. I think we'll touch base again on that in future, I'm sure. Yep. But thank you for that answer.
It might well be, Councillor Myers, that in the year ahead, as we look forward to what we're doing with the Climate Change Committee, that's one of the topics that we bring back here to give context for Sean to produce a report that we can then look at in more detail. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Sean, for the report. I didn't say that last time I spoke, though I did intend to. There's so much included here, and I would be here for weeks if we went into detail on all of it. There's so much needed to contribute to make carbon neutrality happen. Obviously, you've gone into housing and transport and energy production and private enterprise. So I hope other scrutiny committees will invite you and your expertise to talk to them as well. I was just wondering, you kind of mentioned the private rental sector, which obviously makes up quite a large proportion of housing in York. So I was just wondering if you've been able to think yet or work with relevant departments on what can be done in housing, what we can do in planning terms and regulation terms to do with energy efficiency of houses in the private rental market, not just new builds when they get to the planning stage, but obviously we have a lot of existing housing stock, and also things to do with, when we're looking at the future of energy production, I'm not necessarily expecting you to know this, do we have much local control over things to do with, I know that I think you meant either in your report or verbally, you mentioned air source heat pumps, for example. There's planning regulations relating to those, and the kind of outdoor paraphernalia having to be a certain distance from the edge of the property and that sort of thing. Do we have much control locally over that sort of thing, or does that again rely on national changes?
Okay, there is national policy recently that was announced around minimum energy efficiency standards for the private rented sector, requiring all private rental homes to achieve minimum energy performance certificate rating in 2028. So that will support some of our ambition. But there's also similarly national policy, because of the national target of 2050 for net zero carbon for the UK, might not reflect or go far or fast enough for our own ambitions. So we will need to look at that. I can't give you a specific answer at the moment, I'm afraid.
Thank you for that. I've got two more speakers. I've got Terry Smithson and then Councillor Rowley. So Terry Smithson. Terry.
All right, thanks, Chair. And Sean, great to have that robust analysis as well. And congratulations to the council for appointing Sean, I think. The data is going to be really important, so it's nice to have that presented. And then good to see those targets and then robust measures to monitor that change over time. And yeah, now you've got the data in front of us, it would be sensible to revise those targets to 2034. So very supportive of that. In terms of questions, agriculture is noted on there, and I know it's high on the emissions in terms of the LEP, local enterprise partnership analysis as well. And yet it's one of those things that we struggle to find a solution to. So maybe the first question would be, looking at, we obviously still want the land to be productive and the economy that revolves around that, but the use of, say, something like biochar, making those fields also useful in terms of carbon capture is part of it, rather than just look at the emissions from that sector. And then secondly, the value of the biosphere in capturing carbon. We've talked about woodlands, and great to see that progressing. I just wonder to what extent we've got potential beyond woodlands. If you look at some of the wetland areas, we've got a lot of floodplain, for example, through the city and beyond. And some of those areas can be very good at capturing carbon in the long term. And of course, you may well get many, many more benefits from that in terms of well-being, water quality, and the rest. So it's just a flag up that those things, hopefully we won't forget about them. But also to check if there's any analysis being done so far to look at the potential there as well. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Terry. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for reaching out to our group. And I am honoured to be part of this committee, albeit maybe a second-rate member, but a member nonetheless. And I appreciate the work that you've done, Chair, to try and get me, for us to be a substantive part of this committee. But thank you. My broadband is not good, and it has been dropping out quite a bit over the last half an hour or so. So it may well be that this question has already been asked, and I've not been able to hear the answer. Sean, thank you for your report. It is really good and refreshing to see a candid, honest report coming to a committee that enables us to do some really good scrutiny around subjects. My question to you really is around the financial costs, and again, forgive me if that's been touched on already. An estimated investment of 1.1 billion to 2.3 billion pounds will be required to become carbon neutral as a city at a city level. They are not insubstantial amounts of money. Obviously, central government would want to support wherever it can, but with the tough economic conditions that we're now facing, and certainly the uncertainties economically moving forward, as the officer responsible for getting us to be carbon neutral, do you have a remit, or have you been given any task to try and find some funding, and where's that funding going to come from? And forgive me if that's already been asked.
It's a new question, Councillor Rowley, and a good question. And yes, there will be a need to access government funding, as much government funding as possible. I think it's also worth highlighting that within that broad financial cost range, there will be lots of no regrets or very low regret actions that we can take that will actually have a value to the city and a return value to the city as well, with very short payback periods. So whilst that is an investment cost, there'll also be cost benefits for the city as well. And if we can prioritise those no regret and low regret actions, then that will be an important aspect of part of the COVID recovery for the city and economic strategy for the city as well.
Thank you. Yes, Martin, if you've got a follow-up question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and again, thank you, Sean. So, Sean, I guess the second part of my question was have you been tasked with trying to find other areas where investment can come in, and with your expertise in this area?
I don't know if that's explicitly been a task, but it will be part of the role to identify funding for carbon reduction projects when we can.
It might help you as well, Martin, to note on page 37 of the roadmap, there is an expression there that adopting the options that are set out in the roadmap would reduce York's total projected energy bill, annual bill, in 2030 by 287 million a year, and create 3,570 years of employment. So there is already attention being given to what is going to be the benefit, how can we balance those out, which is the point that you're making there very well. I've got some more questions here. I think we'll have another 10 minutes of question and then seek to wrap this up. So Councillor Melly first and then Councillor Wan.
Thanks again, Chair. Yeah, sure. I was just wondering, you say in the report that if we don't manage to achieve carbon neutrality for the whole city by 2030, but we do manage it by 2034, 2038, that still is compliant with it, preventing a global average increase of 1.5 degrees C. Presumably that would be if everyone in the whole country or whole world was carbon neutral by 2034 or 2038 rather than York. Do we not want to be more ambitious than that? Assume that the rest of the world won't be carbon neutral by then, and so certain areas will have to be better, so that on average across the world we prevent that catastrophic warming. I'm just asking because in another part of the report you talk about regional alignment and how other local regions and partners in West Yorkshire and North Yorkshire have slightly later goals than us, and it suggests that if we align with them and have joint goals, that could have benefits. I'm just wondering why, if there's benefits to alignment, why it needs to be us who changes our goal. If we're equal partners and critical friends, why shouldn't they be changing their goal to be 2030 rather than us changing our goal to be 2034 or 2038? when it was decided democratically by this council that that was our target, and we've committed to it, and it's ambitious but necessary and worthwhile. Just wondering, yeah, why it should be us that that changes our target rather than them changing their target. Yeah.
Okay. I think we can absolutely go further than our share of global carbon budgets, and actually if aligning with York and North Yorkshire LEP can provide additional positives in that area. York and North Yorkshire LEP have stated that they want to be a carbon negative region by 2040, the first carbon negative region anywhere by 2040. In alignment with that aspiration could be a demonstration of our desire to go further than just carbon neutral as well. So there could be benefits with from an environmental perspective of aligning with other regions that have that stated ambition as well.
Great, thank you. Councillor Wan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to start by thanking Sean for this report. I think it's a real step forward for this committee and for the council. A couple of things on page 16 on the roadmap. There's an ambition by 2027-28 to have trialled hydrogen in place of gas. And I was just wondering what the infrastructure requirements would be for that to happen. And then further down that roadmap, by the time we get to 2032, there's this ambition to have retrofitted 50,000 homes. And I just wondered what would be involved with retrofitting. Presumably it's about heating, but it must also be about insulation. Are there other things beyond that as well?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Wan. I think with any of these industry predictions, there is a health warning, a cautionary assumption based with all of those that these are right now best guesses of the industry, and some of them might prove to be particularly ambitious. I think, especially when it comes to hydrogen, we're at the very early stages of understanding what the potential for hydrogen, both in transport and heating, be across the country. So we need to be a little bit cautious when it comes to industry ambition around those technological developments. And when it comes to building retrofit, yeah, there is a quite well established approach to building retrofit now, which is traditionally to take a fabric first approach, which first of all reduces the amount of energy that's being consumed in your home, because not only does that have an environmental benefit, but it also has a cost benefit for the bill payer as well in reducing their energy bills. And then after that fabric first approach, you then start to look at more innovative renewable energy heating solutions for properties as well.
In relation to that, and to put another thought on the table relating to all of this, I think all of us as councillors will have learnt over time, and council officers as well, that part of the relationship between local government and national government is one where national governments of all colours will turn to local government and say, right, we've got £500 million to spend on this, who's got a plan? And then quite often local authorities are in a situation where we have to scrabble around thinking, well, we'd like to participate in this, but we don't actually have anything ready. It'll take 2 months to sort something out. And so it seems to me that part of this roadmap is about resourcing the planning of creating this so that we're one step ahead of the game. And when national government says, right, we've got £500 million to spend with 3 local authorities who've got a serious retrofitting scheme, we're one of the people who can just turn around and say, here it is on the shelf. This is what we've worked out. Yes, we'd love to have £200 million to make it happen. Is that a fair assessment of the dynamic, Sean, and what you'd like to see in terms of our focus going forwards?
Yeah, precisely, and I think that's that's very clear when it comes to huge national infrastructure projects like a hydrogen rollout as well, and making sure that we're putting our plans in place so that we're at front of the queue for when that delivery is possible. Not to deliver ourselves, but make sure that we've considered that as a potential option, so that we're, as I say, at the front of the queue for those types of technology rollouts.
Fantastic. Well, I don't know if we've got a recommendation that's the usual, noting the report and whatever, and you will have formed the view, I'm sure, Sean, and so will the public watching this, that actually elected members are so pleased to have made this step shift from just talking in the dark about our favourite form of public transport to the makings of a plan that can actually deliver us a future. And I think I've certainly noted that we're all grateful to you and grateful to the council for taking this step forwards. In terms of recommendations, I'm keen to hear what other people think, but I was thinking about the report and felt there were a number of things that we might usefully put forwards, and I'm keen to hear what other people have to say as well. But I think it's very clear from what we've been discussing here that there is an appetite on this committee for maybe us to pass on a recommendation for the executive consider a positive, clear declaration that we'll deliver a zero carbon council by 2030. You've made it clear, Sean, that you think that's deliverable. I think that everyone around this table has indicated, yes, that's something that we think we need to do to show leadership. Would I be right in saying that maybe that's something members would like to note as part of this, as a recommendation? Are there voices against? Can I see a show of hands maybe? Who would like this committee to make the recommendation that the executive considers signing on the dotted line, that there is this commitment to deliver a zero carbon council by 2030? Is everyone minded to do that as one of our recommendations? Are there reservations? Councillor Myers.
I think you're right, Chair. And so, in terms of saying that that's a recommendation from this committee, I've absolutely got no problem with that. But there is, of course, much more detail behind that recommendation that it would be good to see and understand more fully. But in terms of it being a principal note to add from this discussion, then absolutely, I think that's right. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fenton.
Yeah, I think, as Sean said, he talked about that being a technically achievable ambition. And I think, as Councillor Myers said, and as I alluded to earlier, it'd be really helpful to understand where are the quick wins and where are the harder things. And then for this committee to potentially look at, where are the potential obstacles and how might those be overcome, whether it's a cost issue, whether it's a practicality issue. But I think in terms of where we want to go in terms of the zero carbon council by 2030, I think well, we know the motion that was passed by full council, so I think we're kind of on board with that. It's really, just looking at how we get there.
Yeah, and Councillor Barnes did make the point earlier that how we define a zero carbon council is part of that, and Councillor Myers alluded to that just now. I think what maybe that too is something that we need to revisit, but I think the principle of it, given the declaration that was made by full council in March last year, would seem to me one that would be worth following up on and restating. Are there any voices against that? No. I'll ask you as well, Councillor Rowley, because as technically you're not a voting member, but it is important to us to move forwards on this together. So I would welcome your thoughts on this as well.
Absolutely, more than happy, Chair, to go with your recommendations and wholeheartedly support that.
Thank you.
Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes, Councillor Widdowson.
Shouldn't the recommendation from this committee be about establishing the strategy and how we get there, not on establishing the roadmap? Is it? I was under the impression it was more the strategy. Janie, could you help me there?
Chair, the recommendation in the report is around considering the evidence to set a pathway, which really is about making sure we've already got the full council commitment, because as you open the meeting about that, but actually I think what you've heard this evening is bringing together all of the different strands of evidence that Sean's talked about and evidencing. And I think what your recommendation is quite valuable in doing is recommending to the executive that they start developing a strategy, that they start developing a plan of how all of that information, like if I quote Councillor Fenton, the blockbuster grid, if I may, that particular presentation element of the presentation, how it brings it together and what role Scrutiny's got in terms of putting the jigsaw together and making sure that that target set by full council actually has a sort of a mechanism by which to deliver it. And that's obviously what you're holding Councillor Widdowson to account for, because as the executive member, really, because she's got the ability to have the cross-portfolio conversations, to hold everybody to account and be held to account by yourself in delivering that. So I think whilst I applaud your merit in about the time frame, full council has technically already given you that mandate on time frame, but what we're lacking is the substance of how to get there, in my view, having heard everything this evening.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's given any indication that they have a problem with the idea of accepting a decarbonisation pathway. I think we've all embraced that wholeheartedly and very much welcome that as a way of moving forwards. The question is not whether to replace that recommendation, but whether there are other things that could also be said. But it's a fair point, Councillor Widdowson, yes. And unless there's anyone who has an objection to the recommendation that's here, to consider the ambition of setting decarbonisation pathway for York and the ambition of making the city carbon neutral ahead of climate change policy. And we're looking at the policy further on in the Climate Change Commission's annexes in the report there. So that point is made. I think the recommendation I've put forward and we've agreed here is to restate that ambition to deliver a zero carbon council. There were a couple of other points. Oh, Councillor Baker.
Sorry, yeah, I did have a question whether we need to add in, just for clarity, that we've not just reiterated the climate emergency that was declared, we've changed it so that we're now focusing on City of York Council being to 2030, but do we not need to state a preference or some, make a recommendation or work out whether the 2034 or the 2038 is more realistic to suggest to the city? I'm sure all of that will be worked out, but do we not need to decide now what I'm still confused as to whether we're supposed to be resetting the city's ambition as a whole for 34 or 38.
Yes, that's it. Whether we're here to decide whether it should be 2034 or 2038, I'm not sure that we've had a debate sufficiently focused on those target date options to be able to make an informed decision today as to what we would advise. I think we'd just be whistling in the wind if we did that. I think acknowledging the commitment of this council now to produce a pathway and to recognise that there is going to be a series of deliverables and a series of indicators to deliver that change is something that I feel we can do today. but fine tuning it, I think, is beyond the gift of this committee at this moment. I'm happy to get advice and other people's opinions, but I would have thought that would be a bit rash. We have made the decision just now that we want to reassert the determination of the council to be carbon neutral by 2030. Councillor Myers.
Yeah, I think that's right. You've said pretty much what I was going to say, but I'll repeat it. I don't think that the setting a recommendation for the council to be carbon neutral by 2030 should replace the ambition or the work and the view that the city should be carbon neutral by the earliest possible date. And more to that point, the commission that's been set up with the next agenda item still has that as its ambition. And I think that's really important. To think that we're not going to hit that target is disappointing. I know the report is sobering, but I wouldn't want to replace ambitions.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. And I understand what you're saying there, Councillor Myers. I had one other thing here that I really felt needed rehearsing because I hadn't seen it in any of the documents. And that's not because I don't think it'll appear in any of the documents, but I felt it was a point that needs to be made. And I'd be happy to hear other people's views on this. One of the keys to moving forwards is going to be the resourcing of this change. And we're all aware that it's going to cost money, and we're all aware of the restraints and the constraints that are going to be impacting on the council. But a key thing that I note from watching how other cities have moved forwards is that I think we do need to recognise, and I'm delighted that we now have a head of carbon reduction. I can't say that often enough because we've taken a great step in the past 15 months on this local authority. Going forwards, I think we have to be mindful of the fact that yes, we can deliver a zero carbon council if we've discussed that, and we can see that we can go there. In order to achieve a zero carbon York, there are many things the local authority needs to be doing. And among those that I didn't see highlighted in all of this, but I think needs voicing, is the resourcing, not just of the activities within the council to deliver a zero carbon York, but the resourcing that's going to be needed in planning across the city. The key role this local authority has, all local authorities have, in planning, developing the documents, developing the special planning documents that will inform the local plan, so that then the Climate Commission that we're about to discuss has clear guidance about what the city wants to achieve through all the planning documents. And so I don't know if members think that's something we need to stress here. And when we don't make that decision, but we can suggest that it's something that the executive needs to be thinking about, is to ensure that the planning side of all of this, our activities, is resourced to deliver on those documents and measures that are going to be necessary to show developers and all the other players, corporate players, whatever, across the city, where we want to go. Is that a fair comment, Sean, about the part of what the city will have to do, or what the council will have to do?
I think that is a fair comment, Councillor Vassy. I think when considering that resourcing, it's also important to note that delivering a carbon neutral York will not be the sole remit of a carbon reduction or climate change team within the council. This is a cross-departmental issue, and every part of the council will be vitally important in supporting our decarbonisation ambition. What this team can do is exactly what you were hinting at, around providing the strategic framework for achieving our net zero ambition, making sure that decision making, planning, policies are being taken that consider our net zero ambition as well. But we will need to consider resourcing across all of the delivery parts of the organisation, because that's where responsibility for achieving this will sit as well.
Yeah, thank you. And it goes back, I think, to Councillor Melly's point about a local energy plan, because a local energy plan has function and value when that data set is available to inform planning decisions and everyone else who wants to build in our city. And that inevitably involves resourcing that. So I'd be happy just to have people's thoughts as to whether we should add a recommendation that the executive bears that in mind and in its deliberations going forwards, that resourcing planning and the role of planning in delivering this zero carbon future is going to be important, and it needs to be part of the deliberations and the pathway that is being delivered. What do members think of that? Is that clear? Have I been clear about what I'm suggesting there? That we're suggesting that the executive considers, when it's taking its next steps, resourcing those activities within the local authority that are vital to delivering a zero carbon York, and that includes planning, making sure that we're engaging with all the planning documents that will help to deliver that ambition and help developers to deliver that ambition that we have. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I will second that recommendation wholeheartedly. I think it's really important to show that not only are that we're lobbying the government to make good changes to the national planning policy framework to respect the climate emergency declarations, but also that our internal planning decisions have, like you said, have been given resource and are aligned with the climate emergency commitment. And on that note, I just wanted to check what the SDC is. SPD, I know, but what's the SDC? If it's to do with planning?
Good question. Yeah, maybe is that SPC and SDC on the list? Maybe it was SPC.
It's SPD for supplementary planning
Oh,
document,
yes.
and then it's SDC.
They're in the same
Anyway.
Question. Haven't got it next to me. Have a think.
But I support Councillor Vassey's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you. I was just wanting to be clear, because obviously there are national planning documents which, as Councillor Baker said, we can lobby to try and influence. I just wanted to be clear what we're talking about are those areas where, as a local authority, we have the ability and the authority to to set additional standards or rules or whatever. And would those be documents that are set in the context of the local plan? That's always been my understanding, that you would have a local plan and then you would have supplementary planning documents that would go further in terms of what's expected. I don't know enough about planning to know whether they form guidance or whether they form mandatory requirements that lead to a set of rules with which compliance would need to be demonstrated at a planning stage. It's probably worthy of a discussion in its own right, maybe with a planning officer, to try and to understand, or to better understand, what, because these discussions happen at planning all the time. We want to condition X, but we're told we can't. Why can't we? It's that discussion that would probably be helpful to have. Not now, but at some point. But in terms of I suppose wanting to be assured that when those documents are produced, that one of the key considerations, particularly given the pie chart that shows where a lot of emissions come from, clearly a lot of those things have planning permission. So it makes sense. It's just, it'd be probably worth having a structured discussion to be even more clear about what it is we're talking about.
Indeed. Thank you, Councillor Fenton. And to be clear, before I bring in Councillor Myers, we have had a discussion at the beginning of the year on such matters and learned that as and when our local plan is approved, we have a time-limited period to put in supplementary planning documents that will inform our ambitions to respond to climate change. And we have in Sean, fortuitously, someone who has been involved in the business of using Section 106 agreements to achieve monies from developments that do not meet London Local Authority carbon reduction targets, in order to use, as I understand it, a developer who can't meet the carbon reduction targets in certain London boroughs has to pay a carbon fee per tonne as a Section 106 agreement, and those monies are used for retrofitting buildings. Is that correct, Sean?
Partially correct, yeah. So the carbon offset payment, through Section 106 is when developments, like you say, can't meet their carbon reduction targets. It doesn't have to be spent on building retrofit, but it would be ring fenced for carbon reduction projects. But I think we do have to be quite careful about how we apply that, because our preference would always be for new developments to meet their carbon reduction targets and achieve those high energy efficiency standards that we set. So we have to be quite tight around the language that we use around requiring carbon offset payments for developments that absolutely cannot meet those targets, because our preference would be for every new development to meet the conditioned energy efficiency and low carbon targets that we set.
Yeah, and those would be set in the special developments, the SPDs, wouldn't they? The special planning documents.
Well, the commitments are set within the plan, the local plan around energy carbon emissions reductions, but carbon offset payments could be set out within the SPD.
Yes, so Councillor Fenton, we identified there was an opportunity there that will come sooner or later and that we need to respond. Councillor Myers.
Oh, sorry, I'm here. I've just got my little mascot coming to join me. So I wanted to suggest support for the wording that you read out, Chair. I just wanted to ask whether that includes the Sustainable Energy Action Plan that that you spoke of in email correspondence, because I think that's a really important part of what we're trying to achieve as a committee related to signing up to the Covenant of Mayors. Is that included in what you're suggesting here as a recommendation? And just a question on it, though I do agree with what you suggested, is planning fully resourced to take on extra work in terms of climate change at this point in time? Over the next couple of years, planning, it's a really important point with the local plan and potential national legislation changes. So that's my only throwaway concern for the committee to hear, whilst expressing support for what you've suggested, Chair.
Thank you. To quickly respond and bring Sean in there, am I right in thinking that as we are members of the Covenant of Mayors, we've renewed that membership, we have an obligation to create a sustainable energy action plan that will dovetail with this pathway that we're creating? Is that correct?
It's a terminology that I'm actually not familiar with, Councillor Vesey, and I would need to refresh my knowledge on sustainable energy action plans, that specific terminology.
Oh, right.
But it is our ambition to develop an action plan of how we would deliver our roadmap.
Yes, okay. So, well, it predates your appointment that we agreed that we were signing back up to the Covenant of Mayors. And we're one of, I think there's now 9,000 cities around the world who are signed up. And one of the requirements is a sustainable energy action plan. So I suppose the question is, will the pathway that you will be producing function as a sustainable energy action plan? And I guess since
I'll take a look at the definition of that terminology, get back to you.
Okay, well, we can revisit that one then, Councillor Myers, once Sean's had a chance to look at it. Are people then, to close that off then, is a committee, with bearing in mind the comments that have been made by various members, which we all know, funds are always limited, administrations are always trying to be resourced, but are we mindful, would we want the executive to consider in what it looks at when it's looking over all these plans, to ensure that planning is sufficiently resourced to enable the special planning documents to be produced to drive this change across the city? I will get the spirit of that down into 30 words maybe and circulate it to everyone afterwards.
Chair, if I may just interject, I think what you can suggest is that the executive member will use best endeavours, because obviously planning is an entirely separate function. It's heavily regulated, it's quasi-judicial, it's very hard to turn things around in planning in a very short period of time. So I think it's the phraseology you acknowledge that the executive member will use best endeavours, because the local plan is running at a different time frame. Planning, national legislation is currently being heavily consulted on. There's a lot up in the air. So I think what we can say is use of best endeavours. And I note that there's a climate change policy which will be produced in the spring. So there'll be a further update probably coming to this committee 2021, so you can look at what does that best endeavours look like, a bit of a clearer pathway around the particular time frames for planning. What does resource actually mean in terms of planning as opposed to in a different area like housing, for example? So perhaps it's more that kind of language rather than an absolute commitment.
Okay, yeah,
which is probably setting everybody up to fail and probably slightly unachievable in a short time frame.
We're not going to fail. That's what
I know we're not.
So best endeavours to ensure that planning is resourced in order to be able to deliver the special planning documents that will drive this through. And I'll write that down. It looks like everyone's in support. I will check with you, Janie, to make sure you're happy the wording is acceptable. But the intention is there. We've made it clear. If everyone's happy, I would like to say that we bring this item to a close. I know we've had a long discussion on it, but we're talking about something that is really massive, and we've finally got a document that we've been waiting for a long time. So I want to thank you, Sean, hugely for your work again, and look forward to working with the administration to deliver on this. And going forwards, again, just note that we've got all four parties around this virtual table today. And I want to acknowledge that, because delivering the low carbon future we all want requires all of us to work together, to share the kudos, to share the responsibility in order to make things happen, so that the future can be proud that we were here at this time and did the right thing. So thank you for that. And we now move on to the last agenda item, which will not be as long as the previous one. Sean, you're going to speak to it too, and I would welcome Paula, because you've been involved in this, Councillor Widdowson, as well at great length, to take us through this report so that we can consider it. Councillor Melly, you have a quick intervention.
I was just wondering, before we move on to this agenda item, whether we could please take a 5-minute break. Members and officers have been in front of the screen for 2 hours now, and if just 5 minutes would
if everyone's
really
okay
help.
with that, then I'm happy with a 5-minute break, comfort break. And then, so it's now 8 minutes past 7. We meet again at 15:15 and do the last agenda item.
Yeah, Chair, I will have to go just after 7:30. I've already got another appointment, so apologies for that.
Oh yes, well, we'll get you to speak first then, Paula.
Well, no, Sean can introduce it and I can just follow up, that's fine.
Great. Okay, see you back at 15:15. Thank you. back? Is that everyone's back? Good, fantastic. So after our brief comfort break, we're now looking at the last agenda item, which is agenda item 6, York Climate Commission. And if Sean can introduce it, and then I'll ask Councillor Widdowson as the executive member to also outline her thoughts on this item. So Sean, thank you.
Yep, thank you, Chair. So this report on the York Climate Commission sets out the rationale for the creation of a York Climate Commission, and it asks the Climate Change Policy and Scrutiny Committee to provide recommendations on the establishment of the Commission, and also to review the Commission's terms of reference. So building on everything that we've just discussed around the kind of scale of the challenge for decarbonising York, I think we as a council, the council needs to acknowledge its role as the main placemaker for the city, but also recognise that no single organisation has the power, authority, resources or ability to achieve the city level change needed to deliver a carbon neutral ambition for York. And that it will be necessary to bring together key partners across the city to create shared ownership and accountability, and also to benefit from the collective experience and expertise that exists within York. So this paper sets out the recommendation to establish a York Climate Commission to achieve that ambition and to deliver the transformative level of change that's required to meet the ambition of the Council. The paper sets out the ways of working for the Commission, the structure of the Commission, and the deliverables that the Commission will produce. And accompanying this report is the terms of reference for the York Climate Commission as well for you to consider.
Thank you, Sean. Councillor Widdowson, would you like to set out your thinking and how we've reached this point?
Absolutely, it's a very exciting point as well. So the Climate Commission, the York Climate Commission, is an idea that we have happily stolen from Leeds. So Leeds Climate Commission took best part of 3 and a bit years to get established. It was formed as a great idea, but then it took an awful long time to actually get up and start working. And when you talk to them, they are, if we manage to get this working in the next couple of months, we will be delivering probably ahead of them in what they've chosen to do. Now, the climate commissions, there are now nearly 20 of them up and down the country. And the idea is councils can do so much, but actually you can get your whole region, your whole city, whichever is the geography that is pertinent to you, involved. You get their energy, you get their enthusiasm, you get the connections, you get the funding, and the whole city can take a journey, the whole region can take a journey along the pathway to deliver more, much more than the council can do on its own. And it's how you involve people and empower people. So that's the aim behind this commission. It has to be fairly small so it can be light of foot. It has to be allowed to be able to do its own work, but it also is accountable and reportable and updating, because if it wasn't that type of commission, it wouldn't get the biggest bang for its buck and actually be able to go across the council, across the businesses, across academia, in order to get all of that expertise together. So that's the aim behind it. And the aim is that these people volunteer. There is no payment changes hands, and it's purely their goodwill that we are working on and their expertise that we are working on to get this delivered. Do you need any more than that, Christine? Does that make sense?
No, I think that makes sense. Do other members have questions? Oh, Martin, Councillor Rowley, you've got a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. And I welcome this commission. Just on page 30, when it talks about membership, there's a list of proposed members there, and I note the university, Nestle, First Group, the Joseph Andrews Foundation, all excellent participants. What about the NHS and the hospital, as they are one of the biggest employers in the city, and secondly, in terms of making a change, to have them on side would be vital.
I absolutely agree. It would be very interesting to get them on side. When they were approached, they said they were too busy. They've had one hell of a summer. So that's, that what we've got to do is, what can we work with what's available? And this is the starter for 10. It doesn't need to be fixed to those people. They will move around. And then the aim is to have 3 working groups underneath them that can have other people in there that may be able to give their time as well. So they weren't ruled out. It was, they just kind of were a bit busy.
So the door is open.
Absolutely, yes.
Councillor Myers.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's a question linked to that, really, to just ask how the membership has been drawn up and how companies have been approached.
The membership was drawn up by people giving across the council, different people giving their understanding of who was expert, who was available, who had experience in this type of area, also taking soundings from leads, what worked inside of their commission, what did work in other commissions, what didn't work. And it was people that were available, willing, with the right expertise to be involved with us.
Yes, a follow-up, Councillor Myers.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to understand how the approach has been made, if you like, and in a sense that drives that would give me better understanding of how serious the council is about getting stakeholders on board. Is it a conversation? Have you written a letter? Is it from the Chief Operating Officer? At what level have we tried to attract stakeholders and partners?
We put phone calls and conversations out across the entire city to see who was or wasn't available and who could or couldn't make the timescales that we were looking for. So a number of people were involved in the conversations, and the conversations went along the lines of, this is what we're trying to aim to achieve. This is how we think we can get the whole of the city involved. And the first thing was, are you interested and are you available? Because different people were nominated by different people to say, these would be good people. We had at least, I've had at least a dozen different conversations where the people said no.
Yes, Councillor Myers.
I'll wrap up my point with the last supplementary, Chair. I just think it is a little bit disappointing in that case that we've got a small membership that misses some really crucial people, key people right across the board. I don't need to go through them, but utilities and I just would ask you
Myers,
again.
We can actually put them onto the working groups underneath. This is just the starter for 10.
Yeah,
this is to get it kicked off. This is to get it to start moving. One thing that Leeds said, because they've got over 40 members, is that it's too big and too unwieldy.
Okay,
sorry, Councillor Myers, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, I appreciate that, and I obviously wish it great success, and I want to be part of it. Of course, you may recall I wrote to you maybe 6 or 9 months ago about the setting up of a climate commission, and for reasons on both our sides, we were never able to have that conversation. But I think it's key that we get cross-party support on this. I certainly want to be involved in it in terms of all political groups or all elected members being invited to volunteer on the working groups. And I would have certainly have liked to understand again how you've made the approaches to people. You said a number of people were involved in the conversations. I really did want to know whether that's the Chief Operating Officer or leader of the council, or at what level those approaches have been made, because there's so many really key people missing at the launch stage of this commission, and I appreciate we can get them on board in future, but for me it's a key point really in understanding the seriousness.
Oh, it's very serious, and the aim is that the Climate Commission that helps us deliver the carbon aspiration across the entirety of CYC. That's the aim behind it, with also links towards North Yorkshire when we're looking to go carbon negative. That's the aim behind it. So if you look at the people that are suggested on there, you've got one of the biggest businesses, which is Nestle, who the gentleman writes the UN sustainability chapters. We've got the Pro Vice Chancellor for Research, who is an expert worldwide in sustainability and has delivered sustainability for most of Northern America in terms of paper mills and big metal businesses, big steel industries over there, along with, the other people.
Well, that's good, and I'll move on at the moment. I suppose I understand the point you're making, Councillor Myers, and I'm sure going forwards we maybe the Climate Change Committee has a role to play in helping and encouraging people to understand what they might do, because you might come to me or I might come to you or to you, Paula, and say, well, wouldn't it be great to have the trades unions involved, the faith community involved, etc., etc. So I think going forwards, maybe we need to see if the Climate Change Committee has a role that can help to draw people towards this and then to steer them towards the Commission. I've got Councillor Baker and Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate the fact that Councillor Widdowson has explained that, some people have said, no, we haven't got time. I think it's absolutely imperative that the people that are founding this and leading this are the people that are 100% ambitious and will not just turn up to meetings, but also do and act and do things in between meetings. But I also agree with Councillor Myers that it would be really helpful to have, in the sake of transparency and just so that we all know, a list of who has been approached. I mean, there are glaring omissions, biodiversity, ecology, that's missing, and there's just, Stockholm Environment Institute. We have a member who's on this committee who's a co-opted person from Stockholm Environment Institute. So I think, from my point of view, that's a glaring omission. So moving forward, how do new members apply? That's one thing that I would like to know. And also, the whole area that's missing is public debate. I seriously think that a key part of the remit of this commission is to inspire public debate and hold a citizens' jury at some point. So those are my two questions, well, my three questions, which I would really like to be able to put all these comments in the terms of reference together as a committee on emails and get a finalised kind of redraft to you, if that's all right, because to rush it now, I think, is not very fair.
Okay. It seems to me we've had, and I'll call you in, Councillor Melly, in just a second. It seems to me we've had three different councillors coming from different perspectives, talking about the NHS, about other key players, about. I think if maybe Councillor Widdowson, you can help us to understand how we might contribute going forwards, that would be helpful. And we recognise, I think everyone recognises that the key is to get this up and running and get something happening with people who want to do something. Yep. And that there is always a risk that you can fill a room with 200 people and not have an output. So, but I'm getting the feeling from the members here that we would like to understand how we can participate in helping to bring new people going forwards.
Okay, we can have a discussion on that, but just to cover the point, Councillor Baker, about there are glaring omissions. The reason that the people were chosen for those areas was actually based on the research from Leeds University. So a third of our emissions is domestic, a third of our emissions is transport, a third of our, well, another 20% of our emissions is commercial and retail buildings, with 11% being industrial. So that's what those areas cover for the carbon footprint as a starter for 10, because otherwise what we could aim to try and do is boil the ocean. And what you guys have been discussing tonight has been fascinating, because now we're starting to get the agenda and we're starting to get the roadmap, and we can plan our way forward rather than trying to do everything. So that was the aim behind the people. Once it's up and running, these people will be deciding how they do the people's jury, and whether it's a people's jury, whether it's our city, whether it's, I don't know what the answer will be. The only reason that we are there at the moment, CYC are there, is to make sure it has the traction to get moving. It should, within 6-12 months, be self-sustaining, and different members coming in there, because they will say, we need somebody on biodiversity, we need somebody on energy over there, we need to create this. And that's up to them to do it, to empower them, rather than come across like a teacher, which I was donkeys years ago, and say, right, this is the format you're going to follow. Does that make sense?
Councillor Melly, you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you, Chair. I just, it was again, because I had my physical hand up because I had a supplementary question. My blue hand up is up for a separate question as well. So I'll go ahead with the supplementary, which was just, it's good to hear that across the council at senior level, people are behind this. But I was just wondering who it is, which individual at the council it is who has made these approaches. Is it yourself, or is it the chief operating officer, or the phone calls and letters that you were talking about?
It's been a series of people. And once I've spoken to them and got their permission to tell you who it is, I can tell you who it is. But I've been behind most of it. And then we've had senior councillors involved, and we've had senior officers involved.
Okay. Shall I ask my other question now, Chair, or was that were you just calling me for the supplementary?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it was about, so there's two words which are used quite a lot in this report and in the Annex 2 that I was just wondering if you'd mind expanding on, either yourself, Councillor Widdowson, or I see Sean still here. Yes, this commission is referred to a lot as independent and providing advice, but I just wasn't sure who it's independent from and who it's providing advice to.
Yeah, sure.
Would you mind just providing a bit more detail? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. There's an independence from the City of York Council here. So as we said earlier, it's really important that the Commission retains that arm's length from the Council. The Council is the chief placemaker, needs to set the overarching strategy and vision for decarbonising the Council and the City of York. But the Commission has the ability and the flexibility to make recommendations and provide advice into the Council.
If I can just interject as well there, because I did ask a similar question before the meeting, and one thing that had occurred to me was that as things stand, the chair is going to be Councillor Widdowson for a year. And I did point this out to her and said, well, if we're independent, if this is independent, surely the ambition is to pass that role on as quickly as possible. And Councillor Widdowson came back to me and said, yes, that's exactly what she wants to do. Because I think we'd all agree that as soon as it's practical, you want the people who are going to make this work to not be seen as being corralled or chivied along in any way by the council, but simply to be informed by this carbon pathway and do their own stuff. So I was happy that you'd said that, Paula. Councillor, yes, Councillor Melly, you have another point.
Yeah, so it says that the new chair after 12 months will be appointed by the Commission. Is that, again, is that part by consensus or a vote if necessary? It says appoint rather than elected, appointed rather than elected.
It'll be, maybe that's a poor choice of words. Okay, so it will be by consensus. If it absolutely has to come down to a vote, fine.
Okay, thanks for that clarity.
Okay.
I suspected that's what it was. Yes, if the executive member for environment is the chair, and by the looks it has quite a lot of control over who sits on the commission in terms of new members, then it doesn't seem that independent from the council.
The chair doesn't decide who the new members are.
Okay, so
it's the 7-8 members that are on there will decide by consensus, and if there isn't a consensus, then it would go to a vote.
Okay, so
and that's one person one person from the council. And trust me, as soon as I can get away from being a chair of the Climate Commission, Councillor Melly, I will do, because I believe this is best run by the people that wish to run it.
Oh, that's really good to hear. Thank you. I suppose I'm a little bit concerned in terms of this needs to be long term. This isn't just to 2030. This needs to be a hopefully will be part of a much longer term plan. And while you may have all the best intentions, who knows in terms of future proofing this?
And again,
how other executive members may.
No, but
and in terms of that, sorry, I'll
just let me finish on that point, Councillor Melly. On that point, it's written down that I will not be a chair for more than 12 months. It then goes to Matthias Ruth, and then it will be decided amongst themselves as to who it is. And it may not be those 6, 7, 8 people. They may have run out of time to give to the council to actually be doing this work. It could be a completely different set of people.
Councillor Rowley, supplementary. Sorry, Councillor Melly.
Yes, sorry. Just a point that was made there in paragraph 12. It does say that the executive member for the environment and climate change then takes up the role of co-chair. Is that a misprint, or should that be vice chair? Because if you're a co-chair, then you're still a chair.
Sorry, it should be vice chair. Sorry.
Yes.
That is exactly what I was trying to say.
Sorry, I've missed that. When it's come back to me on the umpteenth, that's well spotted, Councillor Rowley. It should be vice chair.
Okay, yes, Councillor Baker and then Councillor Melly.
Thank you. So just back to the point about who the Commission will be advising or reporting to, I would like to recommend that if they are sitting 4 times a year, we as a committee at least get minutes of that meeting or a quick verbal update report or something. I certainly don't want to wait 6 months before we hear formally from the Commission. I think it should be after every meeting.
And I'm sure that there will be action points, whether they will be distinct minutes or whether they're action points from it and the discussions that are taken up. And yes, they will be circulating, they'll be in the public domain.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Myers and then Councillor Melly. Thank
you, Chair. I wanted to ask a sort of similar question, and I welcome that from Councillor Baker. It's about the overlap between a climate commission and this committee. And yes, the commission can report to this committee, but is it going to be doing the same work? We've spent a lot of time as a committee doing some good work around and interventions actually around carbon budgeting that we had to fight about the head of carbon reduction role that we also had to lay amendments to support and implore the executive to get a move on with, etc., etc. I mean, are the Commission going to talk about responsible investment? Are they going to listen to recommendations from this committee? Because we've done already had a good session on that and could write up some recommendations from what we've learned and discussed. Or is it all just going to get done again? And I'll finish by saying, is it a fair analogy to suggest that it's a similar endeavour to One Planet York, which was set up by the council, but now finds itself needing support because it doesn't have that from the council? We get regular updates from One Planet York. They're doing a great deal of good work, but they need more support, and without it, I'm not sure how much longer actually they can keep doing the work that they do for the city with the organisations that they work with. So that's a concern to raise at this point in time, Chair, and I'll thank you for bringing me in again.
Thank you. I think there was a Councillor Melly, you had a point to make as well.
Yes, so as a committee, we're being asked to make recommendations on this. So if we were to kind of approve, I can't remember what this Annex 2 was referred to, but if we're going to approve it, I think there are a few things that I would like to see changed in order to be comfortable with it. So I mean, I was trying to make the point that the document does say that the executive member becomes co-chair. I was cut off there. and the document does say that new members approach the chair. It doesn't, as far as I can tell, it doesn't say anything in it about it going to the rest of the commission and it being going beyond the chair. It doesn't say anything about the long term. Yes, it does say that for the initial 12 months, the executive member is chair, and then after that, selected by the commission. But it's not clear that they then don't become the chair again once the following 12 months has passed, for example. And I think in terms of transparency and it genuinely being independent, there needs to be, more transparency. This committee seeing, that was quite a good suggestion. I think there's maybe this committee seeing the minutes, other councillors being able to be involved, maybe as non-voting members, but being able to be part of the commission and see the meetings, that sort of thing. I think in order to really believe that this is independent, I think some of the wording needs to be changed. That's my personal view.
Okay, thank you for that. I have to say, you're saying that councillors should be able to be part of it while it being independent. Reminds me of my experience with the York Environment Forum, and I have to say I ended up feeling uncomfortable, in all honesty, that councillors were on the York Environment Forum, because my feeling was, as a councillor, I'm already part of, I have a voice on the council, and doing it via the York Environment Forum felt like, it's not cheating, but it felt like those spaces should genuinely go to the outside players who we need to bring in as voices, though I understand the point you're making. I just want to make sure before I hear from you again, Councillor Melly, that I've heard from everyone else so that we can wrap this up. I think the points have been made that have been echoed, and I think Councillor Widdowson already has agreed to, that the executive member, as council's representative on that committee, should seek to be making herself redundant as quickly as possible, as quickly as they can get other people to take up the responsibility, so that there is independence and so that everyone feels comfortable. People have made comments about the business about co-chairing, and it should have been vice chair. I think that we've had a declaration. I don't know if members all agree that the executive member's been clear that they don't want to be doing this. They want to pass it on. So if we can find, if someone wants to think of a form of words that says that more clearly, that this committee recommends. I mean, it's something that you'll be signing up to anyway, Councillor Widdowson, recommends that the role of the executive member is as short as possible in order to allow as soon as the commission takes up responsibility.
If we can, that formal words along those lines is fine by me, or if you want to do it as a maximum of 12 months, if I can pass it across and make sure it's set up and sorted in 12 weeks, I'd be delighted, because all of us have got too much to do.
If we say it shall not exceed a period of 12 months, which is the setting up, so that means that it can be 3 weeks, it can be 11 months, it can be 11 months and sort of 5 days. But if we say it shall not, in the terms of reference, I think it's about page 70, if we say it shall not exceed, and we put the changes in that document.
Okay. Are people happy with that? In principle, Councillor Melly, I see you're still maybe not 100% happy. What do you think?
No, I was going to say that, no, I agree. There's a balance to be struck, because often these things, they require one party to really do the energy and the work into getting it set up. And I think it's good that the council is doing that and providing that leadership. And yes, Councillor, it's nothing personal. I'm thinking more about the long term and how long term this is independent. It's not about you as an individual. It's about that role of executive member, whatever party they're in, whichever individual they are. It seems at the moment that one executive member who is the decision maker at the council, then having such control over the committee over the commission makes it not independent. And if independence is an important aspect of this, which I assume it is from just the number of times that word is used in this report, just wanted to make sure that the wording made it so that wasn't just possible and the intention, but what actually definitely happens, if that makes sense. So yes, everything that you've said has been great, and all the suggestions that have been made, very happy to go along with them. Thank you very much.
That's good, and I'm sure Councillor Widdowson, we know, will bring energy and enthusiasm to what she's doing, and it's this question of getting other people to step in. Councillor Rowley, you had a quick point to make. Oh, you had a point to make. Are you
Chair,
still...
it was just the wording, but Janie stepped in with a far better wording than I was going to say within 12 months, but Janie's wording is far better than mine.
Fine, okay.
As is always the case.
And we've moved from having 6 monthly reports to trying to have at least minutes from the quarterly meetings and the group meetings. So if we can just have a form of words for that, Janie, that would be great. And if everyone's just in agreement that we could do that afterwards, but to achieve that end, that objective. The only other thing I'd like to say about this report, and I know we will probably all have struggled, is that between pages 35 and pages 67 is a net zero carbon roadmap for York. And it's hugely complicated. There's all sorts of stuff in there. I'm very grateful that we have reached this point and that we're now moving purposefully with a science-based approach to delivering the goal we all want to see. I note that in there are a lot of references to performance indicators of various forms or another. And I'd just like to suggest to the committee, just to get your ideas, I think it would actually be a good thing for one of our next meetings to get Sean to maybe do a presentation more clearly focused on what those performance indicators need to be to deliver a zero carbon York and a zero carbon council, and what it is that we should be measuring in each of our departments and what we should be charging each other to do in order to deliver that. Do members think that that would be a good report for us to have and contribute to at our next meeting? I'm not seeing any shaking of heads, so I'm going to take that to be a yes. With all of that, I think that's everything, unless anyone has any other points. Thank you for that agenda item, Sean. And thanks to you, Paula, because I know you were meant to be running off to something some 15 minutes ago.
I know, I've apologised. I'll just be 15 minutes late, but thank you ever so much. Any questions, give me a call and I'll disappear now if that's okay.
Thank you, and thank you to you, Sean. And I think at the end of this, we just have any urgent business. I don't think there is any urgent business, in which case I will thank you all for this meeting, and thank you for all, especially I want to thank everyone for the really constructive role that we're all playing in this, because it matters to us all. And I'm sure Sean will have noticed and noted that all of us as councillors wish him well and want to achieve on this. So thank you for giving me all this time this evening, us sort of spending all this time. Look forward to seeing you all again. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks a lot. Bye now.